there's three characters we want to talk about in the story today. We want to talk about Judas, we want to talk about Peter, and we want to talk about Jesus. And as we talk about these characters in the story, I want you to think about their lives. They're three different paths. Judas, his path is a path of self-destruction. You know, it doesn't end well for Judas. But Judas got on this path and he got somewhere twisted and turned, and he found himself at the very end of his rope, and he hangs himself. And then there's Peter. Peter is a character that more of us, I think, can relate to, because Peter I call the path of self-denial. You know, we're all in a little bit of denial. Sure. Well, if you didn't raise your hand, then doubly you. Because we're all in a little bit of denial about ourselves. Anybody ever look at yourself in the mirror and go, whoa, that's not what I thought it was going to look like? Anybody ever hear a recording of yourself talking and go, whoa, I don't think I sound like that? The reality is we have some sort of a distorted understanding of ourselves. And Peter, he's a character that most of us can relate to. And then there's Jesus, the path, right? This is the path of self-discovery. And I think sometimes we don't relate enough to Jesus. I think with Judas, we think, well, we're not that bad. And with Jesus, well, we think we're not that good. And so we kind of settle in the Peter thing. But if you will, just go with me on each character and see if not only is that a path that you're walking, but maybe even deeper, are there parts of Judas in me? Are there little pieces of Peter? And as you will see, and I will show you, there are pieces of Christ. This is the Easter story, but to really get it, you have to enter, you have to jump in. Yesterday, I was getting ready for the service, and I'm trying to take care of my notes, and Vicki was up here doing some work, and so I had Charlie over there, just watching a movie, and in my fine parenting skills, and she's watching a movie, and I looked over, and she's over by the fireplace, and the TV's there, and she has one mitten on. And I thought, what in the world is she doing with a mitten on? And she had taken it from what we went outside to play earlier, and she had one mitten on. And I looked at the TV screen, and she's watching, of course, a princess movie, Frozen. And part of the movie, one of the characters has a mitten put on her, right? Elsa, am I right? Do I got my princesses right here, people? She says, Daddy, I'm Elsa. I'm Elsa. And this is the whole goal today, for you to find yourself. In some ways, I'm Judas. In some ways, I'm Peter. And in some ways, I'm Christ. You'll get there. Now, I wanted to, bring people up in their Bible costumes, but they always look like bathrobes to me. Do you know what I mean? Has anyone ever been that character? And I thought, if I bring people up and they're in biblical, we got the bathrobes and we do our best. I mean, the best of the best is hokey. You know what I mean? It's tough to portray that. But I thought, no, I don't want you to envision people in bathrobes. I want you to envision people in Armani. I want you to wonder, what did Judas wear Lululemon? Not to be funny, but to be curious. Because if you saw a character with skinny jeans on, betraying Jesus, then it would be closer to you. If you saw a guy with some Adidas sweats, denying that he ever knew Christ, it might hit a little closer to home. There are reasons for this. And so, as we enter the story, we find Judas is on this path. And he starts out following Christ, He starts out well, but something gets to Judas. We don't know. We could speculate. I suppose we could speculate. Was it the love of money? In John's gospel, it talks about his love of money. And, there's a proverb that says, he who loves money never has enough. And we find out that Judas goes after they gathered together at the Last Supper. And after that Judas runs out to the temple and agrees to betray Jesus for some silver. Is that what did it? Or was it something else? It seems like Judas had this void inside of him that he just couldn't fill. And though he walked beside Jesus for 3 years, he never actually really walked with Jesus. Something was missing, a void that couldn't be filled. I wanted to share a song with you to make you think about what it's like when your life is just only about you. I mean, we've all been there, right? Where our life was about us. And hopefully we're moving past it a bit, where it's bigger than us. But when it's all about you, there's never enough. There's never enough of anything. There's never enough tension. There's never enough money. There's never enough. And so this is the story of Judas, who never had enough.
I'm trying to hold my breath, let it stay this way, can't let this moment end. You set off a dream in me, getting louder now, can you hear it echoing? All the shine, the thousand spotlights, all the stars we steal from the night sky will never be enough, never be enough. Towns of gold are still too little. These hands could hold the world, but it'll never be enough, never be enough.
Matthew 27, it goes on and says that that Judas is filled with remorse, and he tries to return the money. And the leaders in the temple, they don't want it. They said, what you did is your business. And Peter or Judas is so overcome with remorse that he goes out and he hangs himself. And perhaps the point of Judas's story is that we get too caught up in the wrong things in life, and then we miss the main thing. Christ was the main thing. And there's a path, and it's self-destructive. It seems like it's self-fulfilling when you take for yourself, when you put yourself first. In Proverbs it says this: there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end is destruction. And it's your own destruction. You know, there are paths that you can take, but one of the paths just leads to destruction. And Judas shows us that path. But there's another character, Peter. Now Peter is not Judas, but Peter, boy, I think is one that we relate to so much more. At the Last Supper, in Matthew 26, Jesus looks at the disciples and he says, all of you are going to fall away. Now, think about this. Of course, they all sit there and they listen, and they're in disbelief, as it seems like their thing, their group is just getting torn apart, and what's happening to Jesus, and they don't understand where this story is going. But they all absorb it except Peter. Peter has to interject. Oh, I would never betray you. Peter goes on to say, I would never disown you. And this is what Peter says. He says, I would die with you. Why did Peter need to say that? Think about this. What was it about Peter? He could have just sat there like everybody else. Have you ever been with a guy that always needs to prove himself? That always needs to say something? Like, if he was going to be the guy that was going to stake with Jesus through thick and thin, he could have just kept his mouth shut and done it. But he needed to say something. No, that won't be me. He needed to distinguish himself from everybody else. Peter was always trying to prove himself. How many times, if you've read the Gospels, do you know Peter is putting his foot in his mouth because he's overconfident, overpromising. Now, sincere, certainly. But perhaps when people do that, they're trying to cover up for something, some insecurity, something that's not quite right. And Peter, he has these good intentions, but because he's got something to prove, he has to speak up. And Peter is really not honest with himself. The path of self-deception. You know, we're in trouble when we're not honest with ourselves. I got some news for you. This will help you. Everybody else already knows. They just do. You know, if you're a grouch, everyone already knows. I mean, people, this is what we miss. And so by not being honest with ourselves, if Peter could have said, oh, I hate that about me. I wish that weren't true, but yeah, I will deny you as well. None of the others had to say anything, but Peter had to. But you know, it's one of our human faults. We're in denial about ourselves. When golfing with some friends this week, you know, we're talking about, you know, there were some pro golfers, and they were talking about when they golf with their high school buddies. This is a good one. And they asked all these pro golfers, they said, do you golf with your high school buddies, you know, these hacks? And they're like, oh yeah, you know, of course they all did. And they said, what's it like when you play with amateurs? This is what they all said. They all think they're better than they are. Every single one of them. They all think they can hit the ball farther than they can because they had one good shot with their driver, and they always think they can always hit that shot. And he said the reality is they're just in denial about how good they are. Boy, there's something there for us to step out of denial. But by the time Jesus is arrested And Peter gets questioned 3 different times. And he's in this courtyard, and it's at night. I think he thinks he's going to skate by hanging back in the shadows. But by the 3rd time, he denies. A rooster crows, and he remembers what Jesus said. By the time the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Peter goes out into the night, and he weeps bitterly. You see, too high, and then he gets way too low. Thankfully, even though Jesus, this is what I love about Jesus. Everybody, this is so important for you. And this is what I love about God. Though God sees the reality of who you are, he loves you anyway, and he sees who you can become. You see, not only do we deceive ourselves about where we really are, but we don't realize the potential that's in us. And so Peter is out and he's weeping bitterly, but Jesus never stops believing in him. Even though he tells him honestly where Peter's at, he restores Peter because he wants him to know when you feel low about yourself, God still believes in you. Because we've all been Peter. None of us would deny that. All of us have been there. Peter goes out and he weeps bitterly. And it's later on in the story that Jesus picks him back up at the resurrection. And he elevates him. You see, when we think we're nothing, Jesus says that we are something.